Thanks a lot, John, and thank you again for entrusting me with this role. I always start out by saying my grandfather proudly taught at UT Austin for 35 years, and it's an honor to follow in his footsteps, and I get a ton of energy from working with the students. So I'm very proud to have Rod Canion with us tonight. We have Dr. Bob Metcalf to thank for that, credit where credit is due. Bob and Rod know each other, and Bob twisted your arm a bit to get here, and we really appreciate you being here. Rod has had an experience that very, very few entrepreneurs have had or will ever have. So first of all, Rod is not your romanticized version of entrepreneurship. He did not drop out of school, as our speaker tomorrow night had, Michael Dell. Rod actually went through school and worked for TI for over a decade before starting his first business, Compaq, which he co-founded with two others, and he was the founding CEO. And it took them about 5 years, from 82 to 87, to reach $1 billion in revenue, which is a real amazing experience. Hard for me to even fathom. I thought that Bizarre Voice was a fast rise, but it can't compare to that type of an experience. And it took you only 4 years to get to be named from inception to the Fortune 500. Rod has a book out, which afterwards we'll have a book signing, so stick around for that. His book is named Open. And we're really going to delve into this book tonight. This is a fascinating read, and I'm feeling a bit like Jon Stewart now. But I actually did read it. I'm not, unlike maybe Jon Stewart, which we don't know if he reads or not. But I did read the book, and it's a really fascinating walk down memory lane. So we're really going to dive into that because there's some parallels with what's happening today that are fascinating. So we're going to dive into a little bit of history there, and then we'll go into the parallels of what's happening today with Apple, with Google Android, with Microsoft Surface, and some of the other trends. But it's rare that we have someone that's lived through such an important era that's shaped so much of the technology that all of us use today to give us the context of what's happening today and how that relates to the past. So Rod, thank you again for being here. I'm going to go ahead and just dive into the first question, and we'll go from there. So when we look at PCs today and how they interoperate with a huge ecosystem of peripherals and software, most of us don't know how that happened, how they're plug and play. Why isn't the world just all proprietary Apple? Why do we see Dells, HPs, and all of these other computers having devices that are plug and play? And your book, Open, chronicles how that happened, and it has big implications for what is happening in the world of technology today, which we're going to get into that later. But let's start there. How did PCs become open, and what was IBM's role as one of the original innovators in PCs as the proprietary incumbent to battle when you started Compaq in the early 80s?
Well, first of all, thank you for asking me here tonight. This is an honor and something I'm very excited about. I enjoy telling the story, and I love answering questions. So after we finish the interview here, hopefully there'll be some really hard questions. Look forward to those. So how did the industry standard come into being? You know, I usually start by telling people what the industry standard is because nobody really remembers that it even exists. You know, you go into a computer store or Best Buy and you pick a piece of PC software off the shelf, and you can go plug it into any of the PC brands. It could be Dell or Lenovo or HP, or you pick it. It runs on them, and it runs the same on all of them. Well, you really don't appreciate just how unique in all of history that is. Because before 1983, really, every computer industry and every computer maker made proprietary computers. The software ran only on their computer. Their software didn't run on anybody else's computer. And that worked fine for all those years. IBM had become the dominant player. In fact, in the 60s, in the 70s, and even through the 80s, IBM was the number one computer company. Nobody even came close. IBM's brand was stronger than Apple's is today. And I know that's hard to imagine. Apple has become such a dominating brand, but in those days, IBM was even stronger than that. If IBM said it's going this way, people just believed it was going that way. That was the way it was. So what happened in the early 80s that caused this almost this fluke in the PC industry? Well, two things really that had never happened before came along at about the same time. The first was IBM, who was the most proprietary of all proprietary computer companies, decided they were going to get into the PC market in a hurry and sort of test the waters. They created a small project team and gave them 1 year to get to market. Well, in a year, especially at IBM, you had to buy off-the-shelf components. You really couldn't go invent anything. So they bought processor from Intel, they bought the operating system from Microsoft, and they bought floppy disks from probably Shugart at the time. But the point is, everything that went into the original IBM PC was off the shelf. And I really believe, I haven't heard it in a factual way, but I believe that they thought they would sell a few tens of thousands. What happened is they sold millions, and they became the leader of the industry in a short order. But the fluke is that IBM had never before, and hasn't certainly since, come out with a sort of unprotected open product. But the PC that they brought to market in 1981 was open. So that was the first thing that happened. And that by itself probably would have passed, and nothing much else would have happened. But the second thing was the PC as a product in business was really beginning to catch on. It was just starting. And so a lot of new computer companies were starting up. And all of a sudden, something that had never happened before occurred, and that is a must-have app. Can you imagine a smartphone in the market today that doesn't have Angry Birds running on it? I mean, that's an example of, if you bring out a phone, no matter how cool it is, if it doesn't have the hottest apps, it's probably not going to sell very well. Well, in those days, the first really hot must-have app was VisiCalc. The first spreadsheet was another one of those amazing inventions. It as great as the microprocessor and the PC were, it was the spreadsheet that created the driving force that caused it to really permeate business in such a short amount of time. So here's what happened. IBM had the company that invented VisiCalc, VisiCorp, adapt that program to run on the IBM PC. Apple had it adapted to theirs. All the other major brands had it adapted to theirs. But guess what? Any startup or any lesser-known brand was going to be at the end of the line, and actually probably were never going to get VisiCalc running on their computer. So about that time is when my co-founders and I left TI, and we were looking for a product to start a company with. We really left not knowing what we were going to do, but believing that the PC industry was going to explode and there was going to be great opportunity. So we're looking for an idea, and one of my interest was actually a portable personal computer. And we had ideas. We discovered this sort of need in the market. There were portables out there, but there weren't any that really were styled nicely, and there weren't any that were designed to be rugged. So we decided we could do that. We could build a nicely styled, rugged, portable computer. But it almost died before it got started because I had enough experience to know that we couldn't get software adapted to it. We knew that VisiCorp would never get around to a startup, no matter how cool our portable was. But then all of a sudden, this idea gelled in my mind. On January the 8th, I can still remember where I was standing when the idea that if we could make this really neat portable run software that was written for the IBM PC, then we wouldn't have to worry about waiting in line because we would have software as soon as it came out because IBM, being the leader, always got the software first. So that's when the wheels really kicked in. We put together a 4-page business plan. About 2 weeks later, we met with the first venture capitalists. They kind of liked the idea, but they sent us out to California to meet with Kleiner Perkins. We presented to them on February the 8th. On February 16th, we started the company. We had funding commitment, and we're going. So in about 5 weeks from the conception of the idea to when we started the company and we're off and running. You know, that wouldn't happen today, as you know. I mean, it's a lot more sophisticated process. But we were off and running, and we were able to do something that we didn't expect we were going to have to do, because part of the business plan assumed that we were going to be able to buy a operating system from Microsoft called MS-DOS that would run IBM software. We had other things we had to do to the computer to make it compatible, but we had to. We believed we could get a compatible version of the operating system from Microsoft. And that, after we were funded and up and running, we found out was just wrong. The operating system that Microsoft sold all the companies out there was totally incompatible with IBM. And so there we were staring at ourselves thinking, what in the world are we going to do? So we did what we had to do, which was we figured out a way to take what Microsoft did have and the brute force way, one at a time, we would identify where the incompatibilities were and we would fix them. And then we'd find the next one and fix it. And over about 12 months, we were able to find and fix 95% of these incompatibilities. And so when we shipped our first portable computer in January of 1983, it ran essentially all the IBM PC software. Well, that wasn't really where the standard started, because that was just a way for a portable computer to get into the market and have some software. But what we found out is our product ran all the software nobody else did. Nobody else had come very close to reaching that all the software goal. So throughout the year, we've continued to refine it, and by about October, November, we ran essentially all the IBM PC software. And then we did something that nobody expected, and we did it secretly because of the implications of it. We licensed our modified version of MS-DOS back to Microsoft for them to sell to our competitors. And that's the point when the industry standard really began, because Microsoft didn't have one and couldn't make it compatible themselves because it would have ruined their relationship with IBM. But what they were able to do is take it from us and distribute it to the rest of the industry. And that's when a large number of computer companies began to run all the same software. And the power of that was something nobody really at that time thought of it as a standard. But over the next several years, the power of that from a user standpoint, the ability to move from one brand to another brand of PC and take all your software with you, that was kind of cool. You know, saved you a lot of money, and you didn't have to relearn how to use it. And then, even more amazingly, the ability to have brand A running let's say an 8286, to move up to brand B running an 8386, a new processor, and still take all of your old software and actually all your old peripherals with you, and they would all work just fine. That was real value to the users of industry standard PCs. And it was so powerful that by 1987, IBM, Compaq, and about a dozen other strong brands in the compatible arena accounted for 75% of the PC market. It had been zero in 1980. By 87, they were 75%. Apple had been relegated to a niche. I don't know if you remember. Steve Jobs was fired. They brought in John Sculley to run it, but they just couldn't get traction because they were fighting something that was more powerful than anything that had ever existed in the computer industry. And so this very powerful industry standard really had taken hold. Now, the story was almost over then, but let me just quickly add that IBM didn't particularly like that idea, and so it was uncharacteristic for them. So all they did was try to move back to their roots. They came out with a very proprietary product, the PS2. And because they had been such a strong leader of the industry, they were expected to dominate again. And in fact, they offered their competitors, us and everybody else, the ability to buy a license. And all we had to do was pay them 5% of our sales as a royalty. You have to think about that a minute, but that's essentially telling you when to jump and how high, because if they're taking 5% off the top, you know, the low price guys didn't even make 5% profit. So it was going to change the industry. They were going to control when things happen. The amazing thing is, I wasn't surprised when the analysts and the press said this is going to work. But when all of our competitors, Dell, Radio Shack, all of them began to buy licenses to the PS2 and actually began to sell PS2 compatibles. From our perspective, this is a really bad idea. This is the end of things as they've been, and it's the beginning of a tightly controlled IBM computer market. So we didn't give up. We finally found a way to stop them. It took us 9 months from when they first came out with it, but we just weren't going to give up. And so what we finally did, another about as unexpected as the thing we did the first time, which was make it compatible, is we had the technology. In fact, we were the only company that had the technology to build a competitive advanced architecture to IBM's. But what they hadn't been able to do was make it run all the old software, something people had gotten to where they really liked. And so we had the ability to do that. We had the ability to design this advanced bus and make it run all the old software. But we also knew that if it was Compaq versus IBM, we're still going to lose. IBM's brand was just too strong. So the breakthrough 9 months later was, okay, we'll develop this thing. We'll spend all of our resources, you know, tens of millions of dollars, and then we'll go give it to all of our competitors. What? You're going to give all this, you know, arguably the most valuable technology in the industry at the time? Well, yeah, if you want to survive. And so that's what we did. We decided we were going to do it. We put together a plan. We went and recruited Bill Gates and said he would help us because Microsoft was staring at the end of the road too if IBM had succeeded, because OS2 was already on the market. We got Intel on board. They understood where that was going to lead. And then we went to HP and formed an alliance there. So the four of us went to all the other computer companies to sell them on this, what we thought was an offer they couldn't refuse. But they did. Because like all of us have learned, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably isn't true. And so it was really hard to sell these guys on, we really are going to make this a level playing field. We're going to make it so that we don't get any special deal on buying the parts and you know, making changes in the future. But what we need to do as an industry is keep it open, and so we're going to give it to you. Eventually, we got 7 other companies to sign on. This is about the middle of the summer of '88. We sort of cut it off and became known as the Gang of Nine, and by September 8th, we had our big product announcement of this new alliance. Well, the other companies began to see this was really going to work, and they all piled on. So the day of announcement, we didn't have 9 companies that were supporting this. We had 80 companies. So truly, what the press saw, what the world saw, was essentially the whole industry, except for IBM and Apple, were behind this new open standard, this extension to the existing standard. That idea was powerful enough that a year later, when we actually had products that demonstrated that it worked, it broke IBM's stride. They began to weaken, and it was only about 4 years later when Compaq passed IBM to become the world leader. But in the process, more importantly than who was the leader, was that we really created this industry standard that it led to a rapid advance of technology, lowering prices at a much faster rate, and then saved it when it was really seriously threatened from IBM.
Wow.
Long-winded answer, but that's the core of the whole thing.
And the details in the book are really fascinating, the play-by-play. One of my favorite parts of the book is the actual press conference for the Gang of Nine where you led the announcement. And the details of that are fascinating. I love the fact that IBM called you the day before the press conference and said, "You're making a grave mistake."
Yeah, well, like nobody else, certainly IBM didn't expect that we would do something that radical. Mm-hmm. I mean, IBM knew that no matter what we came up with, as long as it was Compaq versus IBM, they were still going to win. They just never dawned on them that we would do something so crazy as to give this, really what turned out to be much better technology than they had, mm-hmm. to the industry.
Who was your mentor for that, or did you come up with that
question is, who is our mentor for that? No, well, our management team, we dealt with this issue, if not every day, certainly every week. We tried to turn it over and look at it. The way we did key decisions is we just kept turning them over till we saw something that made sense. And so it was the management team that came up with the idea. Actually, it was, that's said in the book, I think, one day somebody asked the question, almost rhetorically, well, why in the world can't we beat IBM? What's it going to take? And following that path, sort of one more time, it began to unfold as, if you do all of these things, that would work. Are we crazy enough to do that? Yeah, we were.
So if we just, let's back up for a second to the beginning of your company. You were initially backed by LJ7 and Ben Rosen, which is a name maybe some people in this audience know, maybe they don't, but that name in Texas had almost Kleiner Perkins type cachet back then. And Kleiner Perkins also invested, John Doerr to be specific. And they invested $1.5 million in total. They owned 55% of your company. You and your two co-founders owned 25%. You decided to divide that equally, which was an interesting decision. And the remaining 20% you left for employees. But when you first pitched them, they didn't like your first idea. And they said, sorry, we're passing, but come back. And you had 6 months of savings each among you to sustain your families. And this was your first venture,
right?
Your first ever startup after working for over a decade. But they did love your second idea. And they did have one challenge, though, which this one struck me as a really tough one, which is they said, we love it, but we don't like your marketing co-founder. So we'll back you if you move on from him. And you insisted on him staying. And you got the $1.5 million. So you stuck to your guns and you got it done. When you look at today's fundraising environment for startups, what are your main observations as you relate them to your own experience at the beginning of Compaq and your own fundraising process?
I think there are a lot of similarities to those days. One I mentioned a while ago is it's more complex. I think the VCs are more sophisticated in their checking, and their cross-checking, and I think to get money, you have to have a more sophisticated plan, and even more than the plan, you have to understand your market much deeper than you did in those days. I mean, literally, the speed at which we were able to do that surprised all of us, I think.
Right. In many ways, was the beginning of the VC industry.
Yes, it was, and there was a lot of venture capital money, and so we could have actually gotten, I'm pretty sure, our original idea funded, but interestingly, there was sort of three choices. We could have actually gone back to TI. We hadn't left yet. We had turned in our resignation, but they were trying to talk us into staying. We could have tried to get the original idea funded, but this third path, I thought, well, let's give it a chance. Let's see if we can come up with a better idea. Because the truth is, while we were at TI, we had a very narrow set of potential products we could come up with and not be in conflict with TI. So that's when we went back to the drawing board and eventually came up with the idea for the portable. Something I'd never imagined when I left TI that we would be so bold as to try to build a computer. But the idea, once it gelled, was just powerful. There was a niche. It was clearly not being satisfied, and here was a way to do it that would really change things. And so, fortunately, we went for it. So, venture capital. Yeah, we first of all dealing with, VCs come with the money, but that's their least important contribution. You may have heard that before, but it's really true. They will normally have so many more contacts than you in the industry. Just the venture capital community does a lot of talking, probably more than they should, but they know what's going on, and that's helpful to you. They often, through their experience, they can mentor you or advise you in things that you need, and you need something. Nobody has all of the things when they started. In my case, I was an engineer. I had run businesses, but I certainly wasn't ready for prime time in terms of Wall Street and a public company. So one of the steps along the way was I was in New York, and where Ben Rosen's office was, and he said, let's go talk to a speech coach. Well, it turned out she was actually an image consultant. And so we got rid of my glasses and got some contact lenses and, this and that. Basically, I needed some cleaning up for getting ready for talking to the Wall Street community. And I was happy to do it. I mean, I was in the mode of doing whatever I needed to do to be able to run this company, to lead the company. And I knew I didn't know everything. So we went through all that, and I think that all helped. In terms of the marketing issue, what they didn't fully appreciate was that Jim Harris, the engineer, and Bill Murto, the marketing guy, and I, as the sort of general manager, had worked together on 2 different projects before. We had actually started up TI into the Winchester disc business, so we'd gone through the whole startup process. We knew we could work together. We respected each other for our capabilities and skills. So there was no doubt in my mind that the chemistry of that team working together, and there was no doubt in my mind that Bill Murto was a great marketing mind, that was the right team. I'm not sure why they said that. They had gotten to know Jim and me through the business plan process. Bill had come along a little later, and maybe they were just trying to assert an influence at the time. You never know, but I knew, and so to me it was important enough to pass on their investment rather than break up the team. Now, I didn't do that lightly. You better be sure if you're going to, because they could have walked away. But I was prepared, and I guess that was sort of my style in negotiating. In any case, I didn't bluff. I would be prepared, and if I was going to take a stand, I was willing to make, I don't know if you remember the Businessland story from the book, but when we would tell somebody what our alternatives were, if they took the wrong one, then we followed through on it. So that's one of those things. When you do that and you're consistent in it, people begin to know you mean what you say, and that's important, both in leading your business, dealing with companies around you. In our case, we had no money. We were all employees of TI. We saved up money to be able to stay without a job for 6 months. Mm-hmm. So when we got the venture capital and they said, we're going to take 55%, there wasn't a whole lot we could say about that because we didn't really think we could get somebody else. In fact, I was shocked, actually, we were getting any money. Right. It was kind of a crazy idea, for 3 guys. We had a 4-page business plan, and one of them was a drawing of the computer. So there really wasn't a whole lot of meat in this thing. And so when they agreed to fund us on that, we were happy with that percentage. Wished it could have been more. But we had no skin in the game already, and we didn't have anything to put in. Contrast that with Bill Gates and Michael Dell. In both of their cases, they'd built their companies substantially before they ever took their first venture capital. And of course, they continue to own and control their companies even to today. So there's 2 different ways of doing it, and both obviously work. The only advice I can give you is if you're able to, without taking too big a risk, build your company as much as you can. If you don't have the money, but you've got a good idea, you're probably better off to go ahead and give up as much as you have to give up to get going, because getting that start, getting that foot in the door, especially if you have some good VCs and potential mentors to work with, will mean a lot to you down the road. If that first venture goes, that's great. If it doesn't, it'll work for you later as well.
Right. Yeah, and I think it really depends on the nature of the business.
Right.
One of the great things about today's environment is you can outsource so much.
Mm-hmm.
And we were talking about this earlier today, how you can even outsource manufacturing now.
Right.
To China, and you obviously couldn't do that.
That's an interesting point, because there were a number of key decisions along the way that could have taken us a lot of different directions, but each one had long-term implications. It was very common in those days to actually manufacture offshore, not like it is today. Sophisticated, those guys know what they're doing. There were various Japanese and Korean and some Taiwanese companies who would low bid to build your product offshore. Mm-hmm. The problem is it was a very long pipeline from the Far East. And one thing we were pretty sure of is this technology is going to be changing quickly. And with that pipeline, you really had your hands tied to change. So we made a fundamental decision. We're going to build in the U.S. We're going to build right outside our office building. We built a factory out behind us. We're going to build there, and we'll be able to change faster than anybody else when the time comes. And it also gave us the ability to control the quality and all of those things. And there were several times when we had reliability issues, questions. You know, we've determined there's a bad capacitor, and we've already packed up, 300 computers with this bad capacitor in it. What do we do? We're going to miss the month if we, those kind of issues. We at least had a chance to go bring in the whole team and take them apart and rework them and put them back together, whereas if it was offshore, you had no chance. So there were a lot of advantages to doing it. But looking back, the single most important one was we knew that if we couldn't be manufacturing offshore, then we weren't going to be the low-price provider. And if you're not the low-price provider, let me tell you, middle price isn't a great place to be. You'll be eaten up from both sides. So the only other place that's worth being is in the high end. An upscale brand, you got to do something really different. And what we chose was quality, performance, and features. And IBM, being who they were, didn't feel like they had to offer a lot of that stuff, so they left us a lot of opportunities. In a sense, mistakes they made or things they left undone gave us opportunities to go fill those niches. And so that we began a long-term path to build a brand that was upscale, at least to the IBM level, and it eventually turned out to be higher than the IBM brand.
So I talked about at the beginning how fast your rise was. I want to put that a little bit more in context, give it a little bit more detail. So you and your team grew Compaq from, you started in 1982, and by 1991, just 9 years later, you had 10,000 employees. You had $3.3 billion in revenue that year. That was the year you left.
Mm-hmm.
If you compare that to Bizarre Voice, we grew to around $100 million in sales, around 800 employees. We had our IPO 6.5 years from inception, and that was super intense. That was thrilling. It's an experience I'll never forget. But we're talking about something that's orders of magnitude more intense. What are your top three takeaways in managing through that kind of growth? I can't even imagine it.
It is maybe one of the most impressive things to me that we actually did was survive the growth that we experienced, because it was actually pretty common for companies to fail because they had too much business. They lost control of their inventory or cash or whatever.
You can grow too fast.
And we grew faster than anybody. So people really expected us to implode. But there are certain things you need to do to really improve your odds of not failing, if you want to put it that way. And the first one I would say is you really need to understand your market opportunity. In our case, we were very lucky, and you probably won't be this lucky because these don't happen very often. We were going out with this cool little computer that ran IBM software, trying to talk computer stores, dealers, into selling it. And so we would go into the store, and where's our computer? Is it
It's right behind you.
All right. Do we have a table anywhere?
We don't. I don't think. Well, we've got this table.
Yeah.
You want to put
It
in
almost
this one?
worked. Let's try it.
Let's make sure that we don't drop your computer. I'd feel very
Well,
bad.
it's rugged. In fact, there's a story. Jim Harris, one of the co-founders and the engineering guy. We really were serious about it being rugged. So the engineers brought him one of the prototypes into his office one day and said, "This is rugged." He said, "Yeah, okay." He walks out of his office and throws it down the hallway. Cartwheels it. The keyboard comes off. It worked. He said, "Yeah, you're right, it's rugged." So, anybody recognize a portable sewing machine when they see it? So it had these nice little feet on the bottom that folded out.
We didn't tell them that this was manufactured by Singer.
Well, you had to outsource it somewhere.
Right.
And you'd unsnap the front, and what you had was a full-blown computer.
It looks
there's
just like an iPad.
nothing missing. Yeah, that part does. A few other things in there. 2 floppy disks. Whoa, 320 KB each.
How many people have actually seen a floppy like that? Do you even know what a floppy disk is? All right, a handful of people know what a floppy disk is.
So here's where I was going with this. We would walk into a computer store, and it was really Bill Murto and I were sort of sharing the duty to go sell dealers on carrying it. So we'd go in, and we only had a couple of these, so we would take the one we had, and we'd lay it over and take the keyboard off, and they'd say, "That's interesting." Then we'd go through the feature, tell them how rugged it is, and there's a lot of things we could tell them about it, bits and bytes. See? Nice. And then we would say, always at the end, well, go pull one of those software packages off the shelf, for IBM, and take it out of the shrink wrap and plug it in. Let's see if it works. And when that software came up and ran and worked perfectly, their eyes got real big. And then they said, "Can you ship me 5 of these tomorrow?" Or sometimes they said, "Can you ship me 25 of these tomorrow?" Well, we felt pretty good. We were honored that they wanted that many of our cool product, but after about the 10th dealer that said the exact same thing, we said, "There's something going on here. What is going on here?" We asked the question, we're seeing something that I don't think anybody else is really seeing. We were seeing a pent-up demand for a product that wasn't what we saw it as. We saw it as a cool portable that ran software. What these dealers were seeing from their customers is, hey, we need a portable version of the IBM PC. And they were selling them by the carloads. And maybe, 1 in 5 wanted a portable version to go with it, to take it home, to take it to a job site or something. And so we began to put this together, and we really had this jewel, this piece of information, before anybody else did, because the dealers individually knew it, but they didn't know that all the other dealers knew it or needed it. So we went back and really we had to replan, because we had planned on shipping maybe 20,000 units that year. We had a factory already coming up and running that was going to build a few thousand a month. And so when we went back and did the simple math, how many dealers are there that sell IBM? What percentage of those can we get in? How many will each of those sell on the average per month? We did the math, and it was like 50,000 units is what we could sell this year. But can we do that and not fail? Can we not crash? Because think about the ramp. We ended up shipping 200 in January and 10,000 in December. So there was this ramp through the year that was really stretching. So as we were analyzing this issue back, it was probably in about the January, February time frame when we had enough data to really go back and soul search. It's a great opportunity, but how much risk do we want to take? And then one of the benefits of turning it around like we did, people at first thought we did it too much. But before that we were through, we discovered there was this other side of the equation, and that is, we've got the product, we've got the demand out there, we're going to go get in all of these dealers, over 2,000 dealers. And if we can't deliver the units they need, somebody else is going to come take that away from us. So if we're lucky enough to get in all those dealers and sell computers to them, we better have enough so that we can hold on to those dealers, which meant we need to do as many as we possibly can. So we go back and we come up with a plan we think we can manage through the year. It was aggressive, but to us at least it wasn't crazy. We had to go raise $20 million in venture capital to fund the ramp through the year. We had to do a lot of other things to build a plan that we thought could pull it off.
I'm guessing by this point the venture capitalists were doing backflips.
Yeah, but except for the new ones, because, think about this. This seems like easy, right? We walked into a VC and said, we're going to do $100 million this year. We probably are out the door in the next 5 seconds.
Right.
You guys are crazy.
They
Get out
think
of here.
you're crazy, sure.
So, we were really worried about that. So we said, okay, we need to make it small enough that they don't think we're too crazy, well, what are you going to do? If we make it too small, then they won't give us enough money to really fund the growth. So there was a serious dilemma there. So we finally compromised, and I think we maybe even said we think we can do $80 million our first year. And I'm sure they all judged that down by 50%, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, we got the money, we raised the $20 million, and sure enough, we ended up beating that plan, which you'd hopefully do, and that's what they hoped. It's $111 million our first year. And, you know, that was a great number, and we were excited about it, but how everything kind of fits together, you know, our marketing guys discovered, well, you know, no company in American history has ever done that. So rather than just brag about it to our friends, we actually we ran a full-page ad in the Wall Street Journal. And what it did was, it was something people could hang their hat on. Oh, that's the company that had the, you know, largest first year ever. And that was the beginning of really beginning to build a broad brand and a broad awareness for Compaq. Mm-hmm. Up till that point, you know, people that were in the need of a portable personal computer learned this very quick. For example, as big as this thing is, you know, it's not all a disadvantage, because today you carry around your notebook in your briefcase, nobody knows what you got. Well, if you were taking a trip on an airplane with one of these, everybody on the plane knew what you had. Right. And if they hadn't seen it before, they'd say, hey, what's that? Oh, that's a Compaq. Let me tell you, that is the greatest thing. It's changed my life. I mean, that's what PCs and spreadsheets did in those days. It changed people's lives so much for the better, because it made their job easier and much more effective. So that was the
I'm just
breakthrough.
envisioning going through modern day security with one of these now.
You know, I did that. I thought it would be fun. I went out and gave a talk at UC Davis, and so I had to fly from Houston to Sacramento. And I hadn't thought about it, but the security guys out at Intercontinental had never seen one of these.
Right.
So I put it on the belt, and it's going through, and I walk on through, and you redress and get your briefcase back together, and I look over there, and the guy with the X-ray is staring at this thing, and he's looking at me, and he's looking at the X-ray, and he says, "What is this?" I said, "It's a portable computer." He laughed. They took it, and they sniffed it, and they checked it, and they checked me every way they could, because they thought there's got to be something wrong here. But anyway, it was, and it was heavy, and putting it in the overhead was a back-threatening issue.
I almost hurt my back earlier just picking it up. By the way, this is your water.
Okay, thanks.
So why don't we sit back down? That's
all right.
Cool. So tomorrow night, I'm actually, interviewing Michael Dell,
right,
who you know.
Mm-hmm.
And his major innovation, really, he started later, right? So his major innovation was really the direct model. You were primarily through channel, because that's what you did when you started a company like yours at that point in time. And his direct model was so perfectly timed with the major adoption of both the internet, e-commerce, and later on it surpassed Compaq. Do you think Compaq missed out on that wave, on the direct wave, and why? It was so innovative initially with the Open Industry Coalition, and just for reference point here. So I mentioned your sales in 1991 when you left Compaq were $3.3 billion. Just 10 years later, sales for Compaq were $33.6 billion. It's hard to imagine those numbers, and it looks like, from what I could tell from the book, that was largely the result of the move down market to really get to the masses. But by that same year, by 2001, Dell had 13.3% market share, and Compaq had 11.1%. And the reason I'm asking you this is I don't think it was addressed in your book, but Apple is addressed in your book, and we're going to get into that in a second. So I'm sure you have a strong opinion on why that happened.
A couple of things. Don't sell Dell short. I mean, they did have this great direct model, and it did have some significant cost advantages, but they had much more than that. First of all, let me explain how that worked. Dell started out as a mail order company in a dorm here at UT.
Yep.
Okay, and what Michael did was become the best mail order company of the lot. But if the PC market was this big, the mail order part of it was this big. And so he really was hemmed in, because mail order was viewed as a hobbyist channel, and most people were just afraid to buy a mail order. You didn't know what you were going to get. Computer stores, on the other hand, you had a person talking to you and explaining it, and if you had trouble, you could go back. So that's why the computer stores were the place to be.
Excuse me.
Dell didn't leave that spot. They just kept doing the same thing and kept growing, and gradually as the market grew, that part of the market grew. But then something else happened as the market began to mature. And almost overnight, I think I blinked one day and realized he's not in mail order anymore, which had negative connotations. He's in direct marketing, which was this brilliant new thing that everybody had discovered and thought they were the greatest thing. So they really did stay the course through what could have been a limiting period of time until the industry kind of matured and moved to them. So that give them a lot of marks for that.
Yeah, absolutely.
They didn't just luck into it at the right time. It moved to them. Secondly, it was much more than their low prices. What Dell did, very much to their credit, is they figured out how to satisfy customers better through the direct model than computer stores were doing. It's one of those things, everything goes in cycles, and so computer stores went through periods when they did excellent service, customer support, and then they got sloppy. And Dell caught it at a time when the computer stores weren't doing that great, and they figured out a way to really take good care of the customer. If you had a problem, they shipped you a new one overnight. I mean, it was like they really they listened to you and they made you feel like you mattered. And that was key. I think the cost by themselves, they would have done fine, but they would not have taken over the lead if they hadn't added sort of really innovative, ahead of their time almost, customer support. So, that's the Dell side of it. Now, from why Compaq lost out to Dell eventually, Compaq really parlayed its technology leadership position in the late 80s and early 90s, and then came out with a low-cost line of products that was much lower priced than anybody had expected. Again, sort of the third time, totally unexpected, really whammed the market, surprised, the Far East competitors and all of the domestic competitors, and took off on a new growth spurt. And that's when, in 1994, two things very importantly happened. Compaq passed IBM and Apple to become the world leader in PCs, and IBM took the PS2 off the market. It finally decided to throw in the towel on that. So they were off and running, and really nothing was going to stop them but themselves, because they took their eye off the ball of the PC market, which did have its limits. Maybe they didn't see that they were going to be able to grow, and they began to. One of the things Compaq had sort of started, let's say, was the serious PC server business. PCs had been used as servers throughout the sort of the second half of the 80s, but when we created this advanced bus, this extended industry standard architecture, we found this thing makes computers that will outperform many computers. And so the System Pro, which was this tower thing, was this very powerful server, basically, and we began to develop the PC server market to what it eventually became. And that was a very big market, but one of the things that you needed to really penetrate the whole industry was a lot of sales and support, technical sales and support, a whole new set of infrastructure, software, peripherals, and it was going to take a long time to do that. We were making headway on it, but there was this plum out there that they began to covet, really, and that was the service part of digital equipment. So they tried to buy the service division from DEC, and DEC wouldn't sell it because they knew that's the only thing they really had left. DEC had been a great company, and now they were probably over 200,000 people, most of whom just weren't pulling their own weight because their products had passed the market, or the market had passed their products. So, but eventually they decided to go ahead and take the whole company, and when they bought DEC, I don't know how many people were in Compaq at the time, but it probably tripled the number of people in the company overnight. And it took their eye completely off the ball. Just managing the transition of buying a company that big To me, when I heard they were doing that, I said, this is the beginning of the end. And sadly, it was. It allowed Dell to pass them quite easily, because Dell, at the time, was still focused solely on PCs. So you can imagine that a good company that's focused versus a good company that's not, that's distracted, the focused one's probably going to win pretty soon. Dell, though, runs into problems now because, the market is changing, the world is changing, and they're really struggling to come up with the right strategy to deal with this brave new world that Apple really created. That Apple made some amazing changes that really caught all of their competitors, all the PC companies, by surprise, and I'm not sure they've really figured out how to deal with it yet.
Why don't we get into that? So I've got to confess that my favorite chapter of the book is the last chapter, where you talk about Apple and how Apple became one of the world's most valuable companies, certainly. I didn't check the market cap today, but it might be the world's most valuable company right now. It was above Exxon Mobil for a long time and kind of bounced around there. But Apple is, proprietary company. You get sucked into the ecosystem, and your book touches on the big challenges that Apple has today and how they relate to what you've lived in your past. Google Android, which is open and is now clearly the market leader for mobile worldwide. The second, challenge is their lack of a big new innovation that has that complete ecosystem draw that built on from the iPod to the iPhone to the iPad. And until I read your book, I never fully appreciated why the rest of the industry appeared to be asleep at the wheel to allow them to rise, to allow them to essentially leverage the innovator's dilemma against all of these established companies. Innovator's Dilemma, of course, one of my favorite books. So it seems like it was a perfect storm of events in many ways, and Apple, no doubt, brilliantly executed, and they built on the ecosystem with the launch of apps, and apps was really, you said, one of the seminal, pivotal moments there for them. Can you just recap for the audience that hasn't read the book, what are the parallels between the rise of Apple and its current challenges with the rise of Compaq and the open standard that you and your team innovated so successfully with, and if you have time, if you could throw in kind of you have a really interesting perspective on Microsoft and the Surface tablet in the book as well, and I think the reason I would throw that in is they just hired a new CEO and they hired an insider, so maybe if you could give your perspective on that too.
That's a long question.
I know it's a long question. It's a long question. This is what happens when you actually read the book.
You ever watch a press conference and they try to get two questions in?
Yeah.
People hate that because you can't remember the other. Whichever one you answer
Right,
first,
right.
it's hard to remember that. But so remind me if I get off track. But
Sure.
It's very interesting what happened to Apple. Apple was niched, sidelined in the '80s, almost went out of business late in the '90s. I mean, they were literally on the edge of bankruptcy. Made great products, but just the business was being overwhelmed by the success of the industry standard segment. And there really was no way they were going to overcome that. The benefits of being able to live in a world where you had so many choices and so much innovation from different companies was just too much. But then Jobs came back and he stabilized it and began to do a few little things. And the first thing that happened was the iPod. iPod is a cool little product, okay? I mean, you can play music with it, and actually Compaq came out with a product before Apple. But what Apple got right was they knew that people wanted the smallest thing they could have, and they wanted a lot of storage, so they actually bought up a lot, if not, most all of the smallest disk drive, and built the first little iPod. So no other company could get enough of these disk drives to build a comparable size. So they did it various other ways, but fundamentally Apple was the smallest, and so they took hold. They became the leader of that segment. And I'm sure that there was no way Apple knew at the time how important this this iTunes online store was going to be. I mean, there was nobody more proprietary than Steve Jobs. That was his model, and he did well with it. But, you know, when he wanted to sell all the music that was played on these iPods, he came up with the idea for the iTunes store. It made perfect sense, but using the internet, be able to download apps. You know, I hated it because you were hooked to them. You know, if you bought a song from them, that's the only place you're going to play it was on your iPod. But it was good enough, and it worked well enough that it took off. And what it really became for them, it wasn't the computer business. It was a niche business, but it was a nice source of income, and they needed it badly. So that was step one. And they continued to evolve it through the 2000s. And then the next thing was they decided they're going to get in the phone business. And I remember thinking, you know, Apple's really creative, but what do they know about cell phones? And you know, what their competitors thought, I'm not sure, but Apple really set everybody up because when they came out with the first iPhone, I don't know if you probably didn't notice it, but it was a pretty mediocre phone. Now, it had this really cool thing called the multi-touch interface. And that got a lot of attention, and I liked it. It was really intuitively pleasing to use. But, I mean, you couldn't sync wirelessly with your Exchange, and it was just not a great smartphone. And so they sold a bunch of them. They sold millions of them, probably. But that wasn't going to change the world. That was just another nice Apple profit maker. But what it did was set up their competitors to not expect Apple to get it right. And so when they came out with the second iPhone, it was like, you know, a picture of a hydrogen bomb with all of the uranium coming together, plutonium, whatever it is, critical mass, and it exploded because when they added, briefly, when you put Instant On, always connected to the internet, multi-touch interface, which makes effectively the screen much bigger than it really is, so you can carry it around and still have effectively a bigger screen. And then the last piece, the thing that sort of made it go, was third-party apps. Not only third-party apps, but apps that any developer could easily get to market through the iTunes Store. And that, believe me, was the beginning of the whole new world. That, you know, the next big thing everybody wants to talk about. Well, that was the next big thing in sheep's clothing because it took off. Apple sold, well, brilliantly, they had this version of the iPod, which was really an iPhone without the phone. And so in a few years, in about 3 years, they had 60 million of those total together. 30 million iPhones, 30 million iPod Touches. This giant install base attracted every developer that ever thought about doing something like that. They had tens of thousands of developers. They had hundreds of thousands of apps. And they were way down the road in terms of quality and the system working and everything just humming together. If you think about all those pieces, the perfect next big thing combined with the iTunes Store that allowed so many developers to get apps very quickly to market. I mean, it was more than the afterburners. I mean, it was an unbelievably powerful force that launched them way ahead of their competitors. But their competitors didn't see it coming. They still didn't get it. When the rumors of the iPad began, this was in late 2009 and beginning of 2010, I said, you know, I guess to myself, if they make this not a small computer but a big iPhone, it's really going to go. And sure enough, when they began to get confirming rumors, this was even before it was announced, for whatever reason, I decided I'm going to go talk to some of these existing computer companies because that was sort of my part of the market. I won't mention any names, but I went to 3 different ones and tried to convince them just how far ahead Apple already was. And with this tablet coming out, they were really way behind. And, you know, I can't blame them. They said, we got it under control, don't worry. Because here's what happened. They had all tried tablets. They had all come out with a tablet computer of one time or another, and they had all failed because there just wasn't a big market for a tablet version of a PC. What they didn't understand is that's not what Apple's going to do. They've got 60 million people that love using this little bitty thing, and they're going to empower it to do a lot more things with a bigger screen. And they just couldn't get that. And I'm convinced even after it hit the market and took off unbelievably fast that they still didn't quite get it yet. It took a while before it really began to sink in. Because, you know, after the iPad came out and I used it a while, I would tell all my friends, you really got to get one of these. This is unbelievable. It's the next big thing. You will love it. And their first question was, I'm sure these guys asked themselves, well, will it replace my notebook computer? No. Well, what would I use it for? Well, I mean, all these different things. You'll see. Yeah, okay, I'll think about it. You know, it was like, if it doesn't replace the notebook, then it must not be that important. And so what they missed is that it wasn't about replacing the notebook. It was a whole new market. Because the next big growth market opportunity that was just dawning was internet access. Internet access to services, information, products, all the things that we now take for granted on the internet were going to be easier to access, and it was going to become the preferred way of accessing it with this nice little tablet you could carry around with you. And by the way, the iPhone and iPod Touch would do a lot of it, but you know, the iPad and the phone together really kind of covered all of the bases. And so they just missed it, and by the time they really did catch on, Apple was gone. It was really over. There was no way, because see, it was all about the software. As it's always been in computers, it's all about the software. And Apple had hundreds of thousands of apps, and there was no single company that could come out with a cool product that was going to attract hundreds of thousands of apps right away. It was just not going to happen. But here we go with history repeating itself again. Google, by the way, I'm convinced, I don't know this for a fact, but Steve Jobs really invented this idea. He saw what it was and, you know, the iPhone, iPad thing, and ran with it. And nobody else was really thinking of it that way at the time, except Eric Schmidt, the chairman of Google, happened to be on Apple's board during this critical time when Steve Jobs was articulating his vision and telling, you know, his board where he was going with it. So when Google comes out with the Android operating system, Steve Jobs goes ballistic. You know, they quietly usher Eric Schmidt off the board. But Steve Jobs, if you read the book that was written just before his death, he says, I would spend every dollar of Apple's cash to prevent Google from succeeding in this because, you know, I mean, I don't know how much he was able to say about why, but that was what it was all about. But anyway, it didn't matter. It was there. Google began to sell the Android operating system to anybody that wanted, all of Apple's competitors. Exact parallel to Microsoft selling MS-DOS once they got Compact's version that was fully compatible to all of IBM's competitors. Well, it still wasn't enough to break Apple's lead because Android in the beginning was pretty weak. It was a good idea, but it was a poor implementation. So there was a lot of dissimilarity between phones. Software was not professional like the iPhone was and the iPad. And so you really gave up a lot to go the Android route at first. But here was perhaps the biggest mistake they made during this whole era, and that was they didn't understand the power of the 2-year contract. When you buy a cell phone, a smartphone especially, you have a 2-year contract with your provider. And so Apple went exclusively with AT&T, which made sense. They needed to get in the market. They didn't have an established record, so they needed to go exclusive for a while. But once this thing took off, they should have done whatever it took to get it out into the other providers, because here's what happened. A customer hears about the iPhone. They think they want to try it. They go into a Verizon store. They say, I'd like to buy an iPhone. Well, you're the salesman. What are you going to do? You say, you know what? We don't have the iPhone, but we've got something just as good, maybe better. It was not even close, but the customer didn't know that. So millions of them walked out the door with an Android phone. Now, once millions own, and by the way, it was a lot of different brands, and so once there were millions of these out there, now the software developers say, okay, that's a market worth going to. So they attracted tens of thousands of software developers. And they began to first rudimentarily copy the iTunes store, but now it's gotten better and better. So what happened is, for the next 2 years after Apple should have gone to broad distribution, they stayed with AT&T, and that was enough time for two things to happen: millions of Android phones to get into the market, and for Android itself and the apps to improve. And once that had all happened, now Apple had put into business their real competitor. As you said, Android became the world leader. Now that's in all mobile devices, and it's mainly smartphones. I don't know the exact numbers today, but the last time I checked, the tablet itself, Apple was still pretty far in advance. But Samsung's coming on. They're doing a really good job. Right. One of the things they did, just like, such a parallel to the industry standard, with all these different companies competing sort of on a level playing field, they had to innovate. So they would come out with a smaller one, a bigger one, a faster one, a slower one, whatever it took. They would fill niches. And that's what the Android guys did. Apple stayed with that one exact size for so long. And so the Android phones would be smaller, bigger screens. They would fill niches that maybe Apple didn't see as big enough to justify a specific phone. But in the process, they grew to be big enough that now Apple has not only a serious competitor, but potentially somebody that's going to push them aside. And then one last parallel: because of the industry standard creating the software attention, it creates a field that one of the many can actually emerge as the leader. Through marketing, through technology, however you do it, you put together a series of products and promotions that cause you to rise above the pack. And so Samsung did exactly that. It hit me one day. I walked into a Best Buy store. What you'd used to see was this big computer area and a little Apple thing over here. When I saw it, suddenly hit me. There was this big Apple thing in the middle. There was this big Samsung thing over here. Big sign, Samsung. And over there behind Samsung was this Windows. Smaller than either of the other two for all of the different Windows brands. And that's when I realized, the world really has changed, and here is Samsung really becoming a serious brand and able to compete with Apple. Now, the battle's not over. It's far from won. Apple is going to be around. What happened to Apple? Their stock hit $700, and then it fell back to $4 something. When people realized Apple wasn't really walking on water, they were just good. Much like Compaq did, we had a series of products. Once we got out in front, we were able to bring out the next processor, the next new technology ahead of everybody else, and it looked like we could do no wrong. But that doesn't last forever. As soon as that slows down, you reach a little plateau. You disappoint people, and that's what happened to Apple. They about the time the iPad Mini came out, that was the last innovation that was big enough to really make people, investors, happy. That doesn't mean it's over, because they're working on the next things, and they're a creative company, and they'll come out with something. But so is Samsung. One of the things that I worry about Samsung now is they're actually trying too hard, I think, to come out with proprietary stuff. They need to really ride that industry standard as long as they can, because as soon as they get out on their own, it's a more precarious position for them to be in, because you have other players like Microsoft. It's always been a mistake to count Microsoft out. Microsoft was a great company, but without the cash cow of the operating system, I don't know how many other markets they would have really succeeded in, because their first spreadsheet failed, second one failed, the third one finally worked. I think the same thing for word processing. And each of the other areas that they've become dominant in, they didn't start out ahead, and in fact their second time was an improvement, but just wasn't that great. Because they had the stamina, the stick-to-itness to use the cash from their operating system, they were able to come on. And so now they've got this built into a real empire. They are locked into most of corporate America from a much bigger standpoint than just the PCs. All the operating systems and the software that's standardized from an application standpoint is very much Microsoft. But that can go away, and it's starting to weaken. Apple's getting in more and more You know, I had really a lot of hope that that Windows 8 was gonna work.
I think people are chuckling because they like it so much.
Yeah, I'm sure. Well, see, because Apple actually left this little niche for Microsoft. If you notice, Apple's tablets, their phones, you know, they've got this wonderful multi-touch screen. And when I would quit using my iPad and go back to my Sony notebook, I would find myself touching the screen trying to move things around. It's just an intuitive way to do it. But Apple has never made their notebook screens multi-touch. You can do multi-touch gestures, but you do it on the trackpad. Here comes Windows 8, and they introduce a screen, not only in their tablet, but in their computers and your notebooks that you can do multi-touch with. And that was a real opportunity because that was enough of a difference, a hook, if you will, if they had done it right and done it seamlessly enough for people to say, yeah, I really want to keep doing that when I'm on my notebook. There's some things I'm going to have my notebook for, so I want to be able to use the same interface I use on my tablet. And it was too buggy. I tried using Windows 8, and it just kind of drove me batty. A lot of people use it, and you know, it's not over. But I felt like they really had one chance to get it right was with 8.1, but you know, my experience just wasn't that great. So, will they come around? Don't rule them out, but they've sort of missed their first and second opportunities to get their foot back in the door. And if you'll notice, most of their OEMs, Dell and HP and others, goes on and on, Lenovo and Samsung, they're going to somebody else for their tablets. There was a period of time where they all came out with Windows 8 tablets, and if you look around, it's really not so much anymore. You know, they've still got those old products, but they're really not refreshing those. They're going to more Android stuff. And so, you know, to me, the battle is almost over, maybe 90% over, as far as the industry standard in tablets and smartphones is Android. And Apple is the proprietary guy, and that battle is going to rage for a long time. And both sides will be powerful players.
So final question before we open it up. If you were a student today, you know, and you're sitting in the audience, what industries would you be really excited about? You know, what if you look into your crystal ball and you say, if I was to start a company today, if I was to study an industry today as a student, to go into, what would it be?
Well,
or what would they be?
I'm definitely biased toward mobile. You may not have realized it when this came out, but that was the beginning of the mobile era. It had a long way to go, I admit. But no, I've really felt like as computers moved into that thing you had with you all the time, that there was almost unlimited number of applications that were going to evolve. And there's also this tendency to think, you know, after some really cool things have happened, that it's over. And it's not. You know, when we came out with this, we thought we were really late to market, that it had almost passed us. And it turned out, looking, you know, in hindsight, we helped form the way the market was going to be. So don't rule a new market out too quickly. I think there's going to be a lot of new innovations that come along, like wearable is the thing right now. I mean, I've got this Pebble watch. What does it do? It buzzes me when I get a text message, when I get an alert, when I have an appointment. It's really useful. Doesn't sound like a lot, but you know, the fact that you don't have to pull out your phone every time it buzzes. You can just look at your watch and see kind of what's going on. Even if I get a call, it tells me who's calling. And Samsung has one, and I think the whole wearable area is you know, it's maybe not this giant market, but there's some innovative things that will be coming out there. But you know, medical, the ability to use devices you have with you all the time to really keep up with your status, your health, to do all sorts of things. I mean, there's so much new. If you combine what's going on now in the medical research field, which the good news is, if you're not close to it, some amazing things are happening, and they're getting that close to coming to market. The problem is it takes a long time. It takes a lot of money. But talk about curing things that, just not too long ago were just incurable. A lot of that coming out. And I think smartphones and mobile technology is going to play a role in that as it permeates society. So that's sort of the core of what I like and will continue to like. I began telling people in '08, people would say, "What should I do?" Go write an app for the iPhone. I mean, that was a market that had low barrier to entry, and if you had some creative idea, you could go make some money very easily.
What's up?
Uh-huh. Well, let's not forget
No,
the cloud.
I said WhatsApp.
Yeah.
Someone took that advice.
Yeah. So the cloud. The cloud's part of it. I mean, it's also on its own. It's a big corporate deal, but it plays very well with mobile and the ability to tie that in and come up with creative solutions. But bottom line, just like we did, is you got to identify something that it isn't a need that's not being met, a real need, something people really are willing to pay for to get a solution, and then come up with an innovative solution to it that is better than whatever's out there. That's always been the formula, and I think it always will be.
Great. Do we have any questions in the audience? Yeah. I'll repeat.
Yeah.
Since I don't think we have a mic, I'll just repeat.
One of the questions I have, and that seems often not covered when it comes to entrepreneurship, is the transition between being an employee to becoming an employer to others. How do you ensure that you structure your organization in a way that motivates your employer base to be behind your idea, to drive innovation, so that it's not just you pulling them towards a certain direction, but you create a driving force for everyone that.
Boy, is that important. Did everybody hear the question?
Yeah, let's repeat it because this is being recorded.
So the idea is when you go from being an employee to an employer, how do you motivate your team to do what they really need to do in a small company to make it a success? And there's nothing more important than that. I mean, there's other important things. You got to have this need, and you got to have a solution to it. But I'm really seriously looking at writing another book that really goes into the compact culture, because I wasn't able to do it justice in this first book, but it is so important. The real answer to that is you need to work at a company and learn from its good things and its bad things, which all of them have. So I worked for TI for 13 years, and TI had some great things. We did monthly forecasts, and we learned how to plan a project and then reforecast it every month. That was great. And they had a system for measuring performance, and your bonuses and your salary increases were based on that. Those were all good things. But there are also other things that I realized, and one of the most important that really I focused on in creating the compact culture was I noticed that there are these things that the company does that aren't productive and really frustrate people. So I'm an engineer, I've got a job to do, and you should have more to do than you have time. That's the way a really good environment is. And here comes somebody that says, could you put together this thing for me? Well, I understand you need this thing, but is it really more important than me getting my job done? Because what happens is it bugs you and it distracts you, and you don't pick up where you left off. You back up, and you lose a lot more than whatever time it took. And I knew that because I was in that same boat. I was running a business at TI, but I was doing the same thing. My bosses would get me to do things that I thought were not productive. So we worked hard to create an environment where people had a job to do and they were allowed to do it with minimal interruptions. And in fact, just the opposite, we would work on getting people to help each other when they needed it. Because if you didn't have all these other distractions, now you had time to go help somebody solve a problem or give them advice. And we created this very close-knit culture where people knew what they were doing was important. They knew what everybody else was doing was important. They were willing to help each other. And truly, better than I ever imagined, it became, we were able to do things much faster than just about any other company at the time. And that was key, because as we began to see the opportunities unfold in front of us, you had to move quickly. Just like today, you know, the opportunities don't stay very long. Continuity is important. So you need an environment that people like to work in and that you can keep them. Because if you got somebody that's really top-notch and they leave, it's a big hole. So create a place where people are treated fairly. They're compensated fairly. Now, there was a period where people tried to buy people from other companies, and that's a big mistake. Because if people begin to be motivated purely by money, then obviously they've sort of lost the fox as far as really being motivated by accomplishing what the team's trying to accomplish. Treat them fairly. Don't, you know, if somebody feels like they're not being compensated fairly, you know, they might leave. But if they're fairly compensated and their work's challenging and they enjoy the work they do, they enjoy working with the people they're working in, and their success. Success is, unfortunately, a company that's not succeeding is going to have a really hard time with a good culture and pretty much everything else. But if you do create this culture and you have people working and you did identify the need right, then you are going to succeed. And it's that success that reinforces the good qualities of the culture and continues to strengthen it and build it as you grow. Like Compaq grew this unbelievably fast rate. We were absorbing, you know, we went from 3 people to 100 people the first year. Then we went from 100 to 600 the second year, 600 to 1,200, then 2,000. So we were absorbing people at an incredible rate. And one of my real fears was that if we lose this environment that we have, this culture, then we're not going to lead very long. And so we worked very hard to get people to understand what was important about it, and it really, the bigger it got, the stronger it got, because people were absorbed into it a layer at a time and began to really understand the value of it. First they'd hear it from the people that were already there, and then they would see it for themselves.
Yeah.
Good.
My question goes to the burning desire to that TI, and you wanted to start something, I'm sure when you were so was the burning desire to be an entrepreneur and to thought about that throughout your career at TI, or was there something in you that was changing and you just thought there was an opportunity there? And then further to that, you know, I'm just thinking, you had a pretty good situation with TI, you left all that, didn't exist, there were lots of hazards that had to cross along the way. You know, if you have a wife that was kind of freaking out at home, and, you know, all those kinds of things, what happened to you today? That's really the burning desire question.
I had a wife and 3 kids, one of whom's right behind
you.
you.
Could repeat the question too.
Scott is my oldest son, and he was with me through all those days, and he probably ought to get him to answer part of that question, but I won't put him on the spot. So the question is about leaving TI. Was it because I had always felt like I was going to start a company, or was it more this was a big opportunity in the market? And it was more the first. I think you said it second, but there were really 3 things. Maybe the biggest one was I'd become disenchanted with the way management treated my group, at least. You know, they were giving us all these extraneous things to do, and we really weren't able to focus on the job at hand. The next thing was I'd gotten to a point in my career where I didn't just take what they told me and didn't ask questions. I had really become aware of what was going on in the market, and I had my own opinions about what was needed and where it was headed. And so when we came up with this proposal to do actually a professional computer, which became a PC, we were told, no, that's wrong. You need to do it with a TI-produced processor and you know, this and a that. And I was like, you know, that's 2 years wasted in my life. I just don't, and I'm not going to go do that. So that was really pushing me out the door. And then the last piece was, you know, I knew enough to know that with IBM entering the PC market, the market was absolutely going to explode. Now, I didn't know what we were going to do, but I knew there was going to be plenty of opportunity. And so it was the time to do it. the question is, from a leadership perspective, what are the skills you rely on most to be a CEO? Well, you know, that's also very important. And I think it gets really back to understanding human nature. I didn't realize it before, but as I began to work on the culture, I realized, you know, I'd really been studying human nature for a long time. At TI, I had noticed interesting situations where some really smart people were doing some really strange things. You know, they were hiding information and, you know, all this stuff that can go on in a big company. And I began to wonder why that was going on. So I studied what was causing that to happen. And really, what I realized is, you know, people are really good most of the time. You just need to treat them with respect and give them something they care about, and they're going to do a good job for you. And so it all really came down to really directly saying to people what you wanted them to do, that you respected them, and by the way, you demanded that everybody respect each other. There's no room for any disrespect in any company. All that does is undermine everything. And then do it over and over again. You know, one of the analogies I use, you need to be a Southern Baptist preacher. You just got to beat it into them over and over. This is what you got to do because people are busy and they'll forget. But when you say it enough, now that set of people really gets it. And then the success reinforces it. And then when other people come in, you know, you'll see that it's easier for them to get it. You'll say it a few times, but then they'll hear it from everybody else as well. But lead by example. And the last thing is, if you do something and say you know, if you say something and do something else, you can forget it. Just like you learn with kids. When you have kids, you'll learn. It doesn't matter what you tell them to do. If you don't do what you're telling them to do yourself, if you don't lead by example, it isn't going to work. It may not work anyway, but with kids, but it will with people.
Yep.
I had a follow-on question to his question with the risk thing. I mean, you've got a kid, you've got 6 months in the bank. Can you maybe explain-
3 kids.
Okay. Did I say 6 kids?
No, you said a kid.
Oh, okay. What did you do risk-wise? Did you already have a little bit of revenue plan with the product that you had? I mean, you're an engineer, so I mean, you had engineers the whole time. So there's no, take us through the
Okay.
risk details.
I should explain that a little better. The question is, when we left our jobs at TI, as we say in the book, we had 6 months of living expenses saved up. And that's all we had. We had no idea. We had an idea, but it wasn't going to be funded. But what we wanted to do was give ourselves 6 months of runway to come up with an idea and go get venture capital. There was no path that didn't have raising funds from what presumably was going to be venture capital. And if we didn't get money within 6 months, then we felt like that was a good time to go back and get a job either with the company you'd been in or with another company. It turned out we needed 2 months. So, you know, everything was moving fast at that point.
Yeah, go ahead. Yep. And this will, I'm sorry, this will be the last question, just because we need to get to the book signing.
And I'll be happy to answer questions while I sign books.
So after this, we'll
I think we'll be right outside the door.
yeah, we'll exit and sign books over there. Go ahead. Sorry.
So the question is, what in the world are millennials going to do? Well, first let me say that retirement's overrated. I tried retiring, and it took me a while to really realize it. But you know, if you have a job you really enjoy doing and you feel like it's worthwhile, you really don't want to stop doing that. Now, there are forces out there that'll try to make you stop. But if you're an entrepreneur, you got a better chance at continuing to do what you want to do than just about anybody else. And I just say that because this whole retirement thing is I don't know how it's going to play out, but I think it's potentially overdone. It really comes from you work at a job you hate for 40 years, and then you retire and play golf until you die or something. That's really not all it's cracked up to be, in my opinion, and I think people are going to realize that as they get there. There's already a lot of that going on. And you mentioned Houston and Texas, and let me just say, there's really something about the people of Texas, and in particular Houston, where my experience mostly was. They're really good stock, something about the kind of people that came and stayed, in spite of all the dangers. And then we go through the oil. If you want risk, try wildcatting an oil well. I mean, that's all or nothing. And so, and an loyal set of people. People used to ask me, why did you do it in Houston instead of California or Boston? Well, finally I realized, let me point out something. During this first, 20 years of the PC industry, there were 5 different leaders. There was one from the West Coast, Apple. There was one from the East Coast, IBM. And there were 3 from Texas, Compaq, Dell, and Tandy, who was the leader before IBM entered the market. So 3 of the 5 leaders over a 20-year period, why were they from Texas? Is that just random accident? No, I think it had to do with, there were a lot of good ideas. Certainly there are many great companies in all those areas, but this is a place where if you have a dream, you can go follow it, and you've got people that'll work with you on it. Thank you all for coming. This has been fun.
Thanks a bunch. Really appreciate it.